lockdown, we hear stories about wage subsidies and business payments and different tools that the government provides to make sure that businesses are ticking over. Since there's obviously no customers at the moment, everybody's locked up at home. But when you're dealing with a not-for-profit group where your costs go up exponentially during a crisis like this, but you're funded in advance, there's a whole bunch of other challenges that come into play. And tools like the wage subsidy aren't available to you. I sat down with Community Waikato Chief Executive Holly Snape, and we had a chat about some of the challenges that are affecting different groups at the moment, particularly not-for-profits, as well as quite a bit there on animals, because she loves her animals and she's absolutely fantastic with them as well. So if you are a person who wants to know a bit more about not-for-profit groups and how to handle something like a lockdown or a COVID outbreak, or you're just an animal lover and want some tips on what your animals are going to be going through during lockdown, enjoy the following episode. So tell me, how busy have you been?
Well, we've been, terribly busy at work, but that's common under crisis or lockdown situations we've found. Partly it's the work that we normally do with community organisations. That doesn't stop. We just do it remotely. But combined with that, we tend to get new types of work, so more infrastructure support across the sector. So we've been helping with things like the regional food response.
That makes sense. How many of the people that you work with are advanced with things like how does the wage subsidy work, or the payments that the government's sorting out? How does it actually come into play with you guys and with the organisations?
It doesn't really impact a lot of not-for-profits, certainly the small ones as well. And actually there's a frustration for us around this in that the wage subsidies are applied to businesses and organisations who experience a 40% loss in income. Most of our organisations are funded in advance through grant funding and contracts, for example. So up the front, we don't have that immediate loss. The sting in the tail comes later for us. So that's a little bit frustrating because the system doesn't really work to meet the needs of the not-for-profit sector. So, for example, food providers have experienced significant increase in the amount of work, but they don't have a significant increase in the personnel who are able to deliver that work. And there isn't sort of the same kind of opportunity to access subsidies or financial support to increase the teams to be able to meet increased pressure at work. So if that makes sense, it's kind of like for us, it's the other way around. You're going into it, you're fine, but you don't really know how it's going to end. But we don't. But also going into it, we have more work on. We haven't had a loss in income because that's not kind of how the not-for-profit sector works, but we have had increase in costs.
And that's going to hurt.
Yes, because of course in the not-for-profit sector, we don't get funded retrospectively. So it's very difficult. You can't go to funders and go, oh, actually, we had to do a whole lot of extra stuff. Can you pay us for what we did last month? That's not how the funding environment works.
No.
So it's just a nuance that we're aware of. And
Was that something that sort of you knew going into, say, the first lockdown last year? Or was it something that you got through it and went, oh, well, crap, this is the new reality?
It's something that became evident really quickly in the first lockdown. And those are conversations that we were having in places with funders. And they're aware of that as a situation as well. And certainly the sector has had access to more support through MSD and the likes with a number of COVID funds that have come about. So that will have certainly provided some support for organisations because it was unexpected money that became available after lockdown. So that will have helped, particularly because a lot of some of that funding anyway could be applied to the back office costs, and that's often the stuff that we find most hard to get funded.
So some, not a lot, but some not-for-profits obviously pay people for specific roles, like management roles or admin roles and stuff like that. Do you know what the uptake's been on things like the wage subsidy for those groups? Like, is that something that they're definitely looking into?
Yeah, they're the groups that I've sort of been talking about, really. And so the wage subsidy doesn't apply because we don't meet the criteria of a 40% loss of income, even though we might have had a 40% increase in expenditure.
How does that work then for something like, and I use the term really lightly here, taxpayer union where they are basically a right-wing think tank astroturfing group, but they're able to claim it. They don't have an income that I could see or something that would be considered a regular income.
We could probably claim it as well. It doesn't mean we're necessarily that just because we claim it doesn't necessarily mean that we can claim it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because it's very much a we'll give you the money now and ask questions later process.
Exactly, and we can't afford to be handing hundreds or thousands of dollars back should it turn out that we don't meet the criteria. And the reality is that when we look at our organisations and what happens financially with us, we don't expect we will meet the criteria. So most organisations are not seeking a wage subsidy at all. There will be some that do, and they are ones that rely on enterprise as a stream of financial support for the organisation. So a number of organisations that have large op shops will be able to apply for wage subsidies, and those organisations, I'm sure, certainly take it up. But the vast majority of us aren't really in that position and certainly don't have untagged incomes from enterprise that are quite in the vicinity of 40% of the income. Yeah.
And 40% is a big drop. Like it's a massive drop.
Absolutely.
When you don't have an economic outcome measurable like that, like when you're off working at the nonprofit helping people, for example, you can't turn around and say, oh, we've had a 40% drop in the number of people that we've helped.
That's right.
Yeah. Is this something that the government has turned around at any point in the last sort of 18 months and gone, well, it's a loophole we need to fix, or it's something we need to be aware of?
No, not at this point. And we intend to keep having these conversations to make sure government and those who are making some of those decisions are aware of the nuances of the not-for-profit sector. Because, of course, this is a sector that is often called on the most during times of crisis. So absolutely, I think that needs to be consideration needs to be given to not-for-profits, and I think that was partly the MSD fund, the COVID response fund, is partly to do that. Although if you look at the criteria of the fund, it doesn't necessarily. It's not quite all it needs to be.
It does feel it's some of these things, and I know it's probably the case. They've made it up as they've gone along because they've needed to.
Look, exactly.
And I totally get it.
And I think, I totally agree. I think that's absolutely fair. And what we want to do is work constructively with those people making those decisions so that they're aware of what works and where the challenges still lie.
So in Hamilton, you've got 2 Labour MPs. And last I heard, they were the majority of the House at the moment. Have you had a chance to talk to them about this? Have you reached out to them, or have they reached out to you?
No, at the moment, when we've been in meetings together, it's been in things like the Kai Collective, when we're talking about community response. So it's really about trying to do the best we can, at grassroots level. I think the infrastructure conversations will probably come a little later when we start doing reflecting. And I do sit on the GECC or GEEC, which is essentially the it's the government entities that are involved in any kind of emergency response.
Mm-hmm.
And I sit in that group, and it is an opportunity to feedback, and I will certainly be having some of these conversations once we're in a debriefing position.
Because you start level 2 today, don't you?
We are in level 2. I am at home.
I'm so jealous.
I've just come back from Free FM. I've recorded a show.
Nice.
In the studio. So that
the old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned way. It's so nice. I mean, I was going to say they have a microphone in your face, but you've got one at home.
I got this one for free. I was very lucky when I was working at JCAR. It was the last of the models, and the regional manager was basically, here you go. I don't want it on the shelf anymore. Take it. It's about $300 worth.
Oh, so very nice.
I wasn't saying no. So it makes me look fancy, but it
does. You look very fancy.
It just does the job more than anything. So for us who are stuck here in level 4, is it life back to normal?
When you're out and about in the streets, driving places, it feels like life's a little bit back to normal. But as soon as you walk into a venue, you realise it's not. People are masked up. People are trying to stay socially distanced. It feels like that, I think this is going to last quite a bit longer, and that coming out of the levels is going to feel like it lasts longer. Yeah. So it's nice to be able to go into a shop and, grab things. I was trying to grab net curtains because my cat's paw net curtain like the first week of lockdown, and I've had this big gaping hole that looks terrible, and it faces the road. It just looks terrible. And so I thought I'd fix that, but I can't.
I grew up in a house with a lot of cats. Mum's always been a collector of cats because she works at a vet clinic part-time, and it's always, this little kitten's got nowhere to go. So it would sort of end up in the collection. One of the first things I remember her saying is, if you get cats, you don't have nets. Like it's the two just don't go together.
But the cats like the nets.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem. Yeah.
So how many cats have you got now?
I've only got 2. So I feel like that's a sensible number of cats.
Yeah, I think so. Dogs?
I've only got 1 dog at the moment, but I must say I've been getting, people get clucky for babies. I've been getting clucky for puppies. And so I've been looking daily and just waiting for the right pup to join the family.
Puppy season must be coming up. It's almost spring.
Yeah. Puppies have dogs actually have 2 heats. So they've actually been puppies, through this whole time as well. Yeah, but yes, we will find again there'll be a bit of an influx. I think relatively shortly, just before Christmas probably.
That sounds like a perfect Christmas present.
Oh, doesn't it? Yeah. And then I've got a birthday, so if we miss Christmas, there's always my birthday.
Exactly. There's plenty of opportunities to expand the family there.
Exactly.
What? Last time I was at your place, I think you had rabbits there as well?
I don't have any rabbits.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you have at the moment?
I've only got the 2 cats and the dog at the moment, and I foster animals at times. So, but level 4 and 3 haven't been fostering basically through so they haven't brought new fosters into the shelters.
Oh, that makes sense. Do you know what sort of challenges actually level 3 and 4 throw up for fosterers? Because obviously you can't go in and meet people and pick up animals
so I think that's really difficult, and it's exacerbated if you've got a young dog that's at a stage where it really needs to be socialized. There's a relatively short window of that kind of key socializing period where you get the most gains, and that's between around 8 and sort of 16 weeks. And of course, puppies aren't fully vaccinated until after 12 weeks as well, and so that there's a whole lot of challenges, but it certainly makes things tough. When shelters are unable to have people come through, so it means that they have to say no for new dogs coming in or new puppies coming in. It means that people with fosters tend to just have to hold that foster for a period of time, and that for the young dogs who really need to be out and about and kind of exploring the world and meeting other dogs and doing those things, there are a lot of limitations on that, and that can translate later on into some fears or challenges for the dogs as they're navigating a world outside of that period, that socializing period.
Have you come across any examples of, say, the first lockdown? Because I keep thinking you guys have only had 2 lockdowns. I'm on my 4th one now.
You're an old hand at this.
I'm getting used to it. Just stay home and you blob out to Netflix. It's perfect. Have you come across any examples of people who didn't realize that at the time with the first lockdown that there would be issues socializing animals afterwards?
I think people kind of tried to just make the best of what they had. I must admit, I don't think I realised how many people have dogs in my neighbourhood, because when I'm out walking and about, certainly there are lots of people out and about with their dogs. What they can't do is interact with each other under levels 4 and 3. I suspect not everyone followed those rules.
Yep, I would agree.
Drop anyone in it. But certainly I've heard anecdotally a number of vet clinics and behaviourists talk about seeing increased issues with anxiety and with fear-based reactivity in dogs and in puppies, and I would expect that is related to that lockdown. So separation anxiety became a bit of an issue for a number of dogs too, where suddenly people were at home all the time and dogs were like, yeah, this is how life's meant to be. And then all of a sudden they're left for 8 hours again a day. And a number of dogs haven't coped well with that transition kind of out of lockdown. Yeah.
It must be so tough for them. I not being a pet owner myself, I went for children instead, which was a terrible mistake. They're far more expensive and they eat way more, make much more mess. But
they do give you grandchildren, though, don't they?
Yeah, that's very true. And the grandkid is very cute. He's adorable, but I can give him back. So
that is true as well.
That's the best thing about grandkids. But I've found with them, it's fine people being home, they get used to it because they're children. They like having people around. For dogs, okay, even walking down the street and seeing another dog and not being able to interact with it, that must be, that goes against every instinct that they've got.
Yeah, it does. Although in saying that, quite an important skill to teach your dog is that it doesn't get to approach every dog that it sees. And that's quite important because not every dog wants to greet every other dog as well. So teaching your dog some self-restraint is actually a really good thing. I think the problem is that not everyone necessarily has the tools or the experience on how to train their dog to ignore another dog or to focus on you as you pass that other dog. So what they end up doing is pulling on their lead and yanking their dog away from the other dog. And that in itself can actually potentially create a reactivity. So they see, I'm going to call it a trigger, but something that excites them or scares them, one or the other. So they see something that changes their emotional response. And then they get yanked by the neck or, pulled away. And that's quite an aversive feeling. And that can end up, sorry, my dog's about to bark.
Just wants to get involved.
The boy. So that can end up creating a fear response and then develop into a reactivity when they see other dogs. And people would call that like a dog-on-dog aggression. It's actually often a lead-associated aggression, and it's a fear response, a reactivity rather than a true aggression.
I've noticed it a bit around here because across the road, my neighbours have a big, I think it's a collie over there that likes to bark loudly when people walk past and likes to be the centre of attention. But you've got other people walking down the street with their dogs on leads, and it's just an instant yank as soon as one of the dogs start to bark at each other. It doesnand sound like I get why they're doing it.
Yeah. Oh, look, it almost feels like the response you want to do.
Yeah.
And especially if you see a dog and it goes to run at your dog, pulling it back feels like the thing you want to do, but really it's not the most constructive response. And probably the key, if we're just going to do a little dog training thing here, the key is to actually to practice this stuff before you have a problem. And that can sound a bit weird, and how do you actually do that? But there are things that if you take your dog out and about, I always have heaps of treats on me all the time. I train everything with rewards. I will call my dog back to me constantly. So he'll just be walking and sniffing and enjoying things, and I'll reward him for doing that, and I'll call him to me, and then he'll come back round, I'll reward him. So that by the time we see another dog, now I like to respond well before my dog's reacted to that other dog. I'll start calling him to me, and I might put him in a watch, so I get him to look at my face, and we might do some heel work. I might do a scatter feed on the ground. A scatter feed is particularly good for a dog if the other dog is being quite reactive. If it's a bit further away, say other side of the street, maybe it's barking or a bit lungy. A scatter feed's really good because your dog ends up sniffing for the treats. Sniffing is it's a relaxing sort of behaviour. It's a calming behaviour.
Okay.
It also calms the other dog. So when because your dog no longer looks like a threat.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it sort of de-escalates the situation a bit for everybody.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you find, or have you come across a lot of people who didn't realise how much work needed to be done with their dogs after lockdowns?
I think not so much me, but I think the shelters absolutely have found that. I think that's extremely frustrating for people. I think dogs look look easy, and when they've been well trained, it looks like it's the simplest thing in the world. And to some degree, it's not difficult. A lot of it's actually quite logical once you've got the basics sort of down. But I think what's difficult is consistency for people, and especially if you've got kids. It's actually really hard to be consistent if you've got kids. Like, we don't feed dogs from the table until you've got a kid,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that can be really challenging. And can then make it quite hard to get consistent behaviours. Things like dogs jumping up on people. Children and children and people like myself can sometimes encourage that behaviour.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
That makes sense. I think people often forget, like, being in a lockdown situation, you sort of sit there going, okay, cool, I'm home, I've got food, I've got the animals, like they sort of take stock, but they don't realize just what's involved in going out and looking after them at the same time, and making sure that, like, we need to go out and get exercise for our own mental health. It's absolutely the same for the animals that we're with.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just physical, it's mental. Aspen, my dog, he usually goes to university 2 days a week, where he's scenting for invasive. Yeah, he is. Smarter than me. So he's been learning to scent for invasive fish species.
Oh, wow.
But he's doing well, considering he's a new kid on the block, and he's actually already progressed to real world samples. Some days he's great at it, but other days he's absolutely appalling. But
I feel the same about most things I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And regardless, it's a hugely enriching behaviour for him. It really stimulates his brain. Now, we don't have that during lockdown, and I take him out for an hour's walk every day, twice a day if I can. But what I have been doing, and particularly when the weather's poor, is just I teach him new tricks. So at the moment, we're doing this trick where he's learning to put his nose inside my hand, and he has to hold it there. So at the moment, we're trying to extend the hold. He just keeps coming, trying to flick my hand at the moment and get the treat, and flicks it with his nose. But eventually that will turn into me lifting his lip, and then it will turn into me brushing his teeth.
Okay.
So we're just creating a series of activities to build his confidence, in that I can undertake a health, a health activity with him. But we're breaking it down into a series of little exercises, and it's great because it's massively stimulating for his brain, trying to figure out what it is I want him to do, like to come up to me, put his muzzle in my hand, and then hold it there. And the next thing I want to do now that I'm out of lockdown is I'm going to buy a bell, and I teach him to ring a bell.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah. I think he'll be looking forward to it. All these new things to do. Yeah. In terms of the not-for-profits with animals, do you know how much they've been hit by lockdowns financially? Like, has there been much?
A lot of not-for-profit animal, organisations rely on a lot of op shops. So and fundraising. So, out and about with buckets and those types of activities. And they have been really impacted. Those activities have been impacted by COVID. And that will have quite a long-term impact, I think, as well. I don't know what the stats are like in terms of people returning to some of those places, but we do know that out of lockdown, it appears to be around a month before people start turning up to kind of events. So even out of lockdown, it will take a while before those fundraising events are even an option. And of course, they have costs to organise as well. And I think that there are still fears that people have. Do we go ahead and organise something to have it cancelled? Are we able to bear that cost if that happens? So I think that those are some considerations that those sorts of groups are having to take into account at the moment. And I think that's that same thing is impacting lots of different organisations. The amount of conferences that have been cancelled, and all of those have costs. And again, they're things that are, for a not-for-profit, are really hard to have covered. I must say though that our funders have been extremely understanding. So I think that that's really helpful. We're at a point, Community Waikato are looking at next year holding our our conference. So we do it biennially. We missed a year because we were concerned about COVID, so we're looking at doing it next year. But we're having to have some hard conversations about what happens if we book a venue and then we're no longer able to run. So we need venues to be really clear about what their cancellation policies are, and we need our funders to be really clear that we can't absorb a financial hit. We don't have untagged money for this. So we need to know our funders would be willing to take a risk if they want to fund this event. So those are some really hard conversations to have.
But it's not something that 18 months, 2 years ago would have even been a consideration.
No, not anywhere to the degree. We always had that concern, if we didn't get the numbers, we might have to cancel. But we never really thought there might be a national event.
International.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That would stop us from being able to go forward with this. So, so those are the sorts of things we're needing to think about now, because we also think that the opportunity to bring people together is actually really important, and particularly in the not-for-profit sector, we're very people-focused. So, and we also we don't have a lot of opportunities to really collaborate and cross-pollinate, and so this is a wonderful opportunity to slow everyone down and then to seed some conversations and demonstrate some opportunities, and then allow people to kind of run with that. So, we do think that these opportunities are really valuable. So, we want to go ahead, but there's a lot to consider before we really can commit to it as well.
How have the local councils been in terms of support levels that you guys have been getting around everything that's sort of happening at the moment? Like, has there been any outreach from that sector?
Local council has been fantastic. In the first lockdown particularly, they were incredible. They came up with significant amount of money for the food effort, which was brilliant. I think that they've been good partners. Hamilton City Council has got a really good community development team who are really well connected with the community, and so they've kept really, really involved right across the sector, and are feeding back what's happening so that the councillors are aware as well about the impact at a grassroots level. So I think that that's really positive. And we looked around the region after the first lockdown, we certainly could see a difference between councils that had invested in community development in terms of teams, and those councils who didn't have community development as a part of their infrastructure, and they significantly lacked the insights into what was happening in their communities. So I thought that was really helpful.
Is that something that they've looked to fix over the last 18 months?
Yeah, absolutely. Waipā District Council, for example, after that lockdown, employed 2 community development workers, hadn't had them before that. And our hope is that this time they will have really been able to demonstrate the value of having those people on board and as a conduit between the council and the community.
It must be a very difficult thing to plan for as well, because nobody knows when the next lockdown is. We all kind of suspected that there would be one at some stage, but you literally get a message on the radio going, "Oh, there's a case," and everybody panics, and suddenly you've got to kick into that "it's probably going to happen" gear. For the organisations that you work with, was there contingency plans put in place after the last lockdowns? Were they sort of prepared for it?
I think, absolutely. I think in terms of people's technology, people's systems, they were largely in place. Delta has complicated things a little more. So things like the food system, getting food to people, had to change because they needed to heighten things like, the PPE gear, the quality of that, the social distancing between their own staff, but also how they would engage with people coming to collect food, and lots of changes needing to tweak as a result of the Delta strain. I think the difficulty with this lockdown was it was almost kind of rolling, like it happened immediately, right?
Yes.
We got very little warning about there's one person, and then by that night, lockdown. But what was difficult was it was kind of like, well, it'll be 3 days and then we'll look again, and then it'll be another week and then we'll. And the difficulty with that is the community groups for a while were kind of like, well, do we mobilise or do we not mobilise? wait until we hear. And so it kind of meant that the action took a little while to kick into gear. We were meeting and talking about what might need to happen, but it took a little longer to get the actual mechanisms in place to really start meeting the need. And the need came in a little slower, so that was interesting.
Okay. Any idea why that was?
I think, again, people were thinking, if it's only 3 days, we'll probably be fine. But then when it was like, it's another week, then people start getting more and more concerned about what they have in the pantry and, I
don't know if the supermarkets up here were anything to go by. Like the day that it was announced, I ran out of milk that morning. And, it was just a normal morning. So I thought I'd call into the supermarket on the way home, and it was insane. It was absolutely insane.
I drove in and out of the car park of the supermarket, and I went, I'll go to my local shops.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. Was I went down to the local shops, and then a couple of days later, I went back up to the supermarket to do like the big shop. Get back home, and that supermarket showed up on the places of interest list. It was like, oh my God. I'm right in the middle of the Birkdale Social Club cluster. That's all around me. So like my pizza place 500 meters up the road is a place of interest. And my gas station, my supermarket, it's just, I think they might have fallen off the list now.
Because you would feel quite vulnerable being right in that place to even go out and exercise.
Yes. Yeah, it's been really weird. Like everybody's out and about at the moment. There's lots of people out walking because there's nothing else they can do. I feel really bad when I go out because I have the choice of either being able to see or not being able to see. I either wear my glasses and no mask, or I wear a mask and no glasses. And I fog up. Nothing I can do can stop that. I got so many evils last time I went out there, like evils and side eyes just walking past the dairy. Opposite side of the road to the dairy, and you've got these people lining up out there just going at you. It does feel like everyone's judging you because you might be the person who makes them sick because we know it's right there. And I don't want to do that.
I'm going to try a product, Paul, and if it works for me, I'll let you know. So it's a couple of things. One is a nose clip that goes on top. And so my hope is that will stop the air coming up under my glasses. And the other one is actually a product by New Zealand Protection, which actually is a silicone product that clips into the mask and holds it out from your mouth. So I think part of the problem is that it kind of, everything just gets blown up. Whereas if it's holding it out from your mouth a little more, my hope is that it won't go flying up and fogging the glasses. If it works, I will let you know.
Let me know. I was tempted to get like anti-fog spray for goggles and see if that did the trick, but apparently that's only for like if you've been in chlorine and it starts to strip any coatings that you've got off your glasses, and I didn't want to risk that. I do have some here somewhere, but just it's not going to risk it. So, final official question for you before I hit the stop recording button. What advice have you got for people out there going through lockdowns or dealing with this kind of pressure on how they can get through it and some of the considerations they can put in place to make it better for them?
I think I think for me, and the advice I keep giving my team when I'm talking to my staff is that to really reflect on what it is that you need, because we all need slightly different things. I know I need some physical activity. One of my team members is a gardener and she needs to get out into the garden. Another team member actually wants to sit on the couch and watch TV. It's about identifying what works for you and not trying to do all the things people say you should be doing, and really looking at what brings you joy, what relaxes you, what gives you that time out. So, sorry, let me hang that up.
That's right. I've had like 3 emails come in the last 10 minutes.
I think, I talked about enriching behaviours for dogs. I think that we need the same sort of thing for ourselves. And taking those moments, just before lockdown, I went and had a play with clay, and I did some pottery, and I hadn't done that for a very long time, but it reminded me how, like, when I say a long time, I would have been a child, but it reminded me of how much I loved that. And then I thought, what else I used to love was hearing someone read me a story. I used to love that as a kid. So I ended up going into Borrow Box at the library and downloading an audiobook. And so I'm being read to now through an audiobook. And actually, it's just really cool. So I think it's about being a little bit creative, perhaps, and looking for those things that bring you joy and spending time doing them. Don't feel guilted into, I should be baking bread, I should be walking for 3 hours. Yeah, I shouldn't be drinking this wine.
Definitely don't feel guilty about that at the moment.
No. So it brings you joy. And I think maintaining those connections with people, and even if that has to be virtually, it's certainly better than being isolated. And I think I love the fact that we can speak face to face to people. Can you imagine if this had happened in the 80s?
No, it would have been a nightmare. I would have had to talk to my parents and my siblings.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a whole other way that we can stay connected. So yeah, that'd probably be my advice.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Thank Holly for giving up her time on the first day of level 2 for us, so she could have been out doing just about anything and she chose to sit down with me, so I really do appreciate it. If you want a bit more information about what Community Waikato does, I'll leave a link in the description down below. Feel free to check them out, give them a hand if you need to. And don't forget, when you're dealing particularly with not-for-profit groups around times like this, it is a bit tougher for them, and so any sort of help that you can offer is probably going to be very much accepted. Until next time, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the episode.